Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for what Jesus asked us to do, to remember him. And as Phil opens up something more of the meaning of communion this morning, pray for your Spirit to speak through him into our hearts and into our lives. Amen.
Thank you, Anne. Welcome to those who are on stream, and it's great to have you with us this morning, and if you're catching up later on, it's lovely to have you with us. My name is Phil White. I'm part of the team here that leads the church at Broughton, and it's great to speak to you this morning. Shirley was going to be speaking this morning, but she's not very well this week, so she asked me to swap with her, as it were. We are, you may have said, the year of if. What's communion got to do with an infectious faith? Well, I want to tell you a story, true story. Anne and I have just been away for a 2-day retreat with two friends from college when we were ordained at the same time, and we've kept together, and we go away for once a year for a couple of days to process and to reflect and so on. And anyway, I had a conversation with one of these guys, Eric. This was just before Christmas when I spoke to him, and I said, Eric, I want you to imagine that I've got someone in my congregation called Sonia, all right? And Sonia is struggling with her faith. She's feeling distant from God. She's hanging on, if you like, by her fingertips. Whenever she tries to read the Bible, she falls asleep. Prayer, forget it. Not a chance. And she's coming occasionally to church. She's struggling to hang on. I said, What should I tell her? What can I do to encourage her, to keep her on board, as it were? And my friend Eric said, get her to come to communion. If she can keep being part of the church when we take communion, that's all she needs at first. And I said to him, okay, I've got that, but why? He said, there's a profound mystery here, that we experience God's presence when we take communion. And that's what I want to look at this morning. How do we experience the presence of God in communion? Now, as I say, you can tell from my reaction when Eric spoke to me, I get that, Eric, but why? How? Surely it's just a part of our service. But I'm beginning to believe more and more that we do experience God's presence during communion. I'm not saying, like the Roman Catholics do, that they believe in what's called transubstantiation, where the bread and the wine physically changes into Jesus's body and Jesus's blood. I'm not saying that. And in a sense, what I'm wanting you to do this morning is come with me on a journey to explore this mystery. And I've got one point this morning, that I believe God is with us in communion, and I want to try and show you how. And what I want to do this morning is I want to look back through the centuries and see how people saw God in everything they did and everything they came across. And yet nowadays, in our society in the 21st century, generally, spiritual things have been thrown out. Most people live with the physical here and now. And what I want to do then is to show from the Bible that it talks about God being in everything. God is with us, and especially in communion. When Jesus said, "This is my body. This is my blood." So, would you come with me on a history lesson? I'm sorry if history turned you off at school. I'll try and make this interesting. We're going to go to look at a history lesson, and I'm going to start in the medieval times, which is basically between the 5th century and the 15th century, 1,000 years ago or so. And there was a belief at that time that the bread and the wine physically changed into the flesh and blood of Jesus. As I've said, it's called transubstantiation, and they talk about the substance of the bread and the substance of the wine changing. And it's called transubstantiation. Trans meaning change, and substance, substantiation. Transubstantiation, change in substance. Now, way back, centuries and centuries ago, in the medieval period, the services would have been way different to this. For a start, they didn't have seats. Everyone stood. Church was packed because basically everybody from the community came. All the services were in Latin, and not a single person in the congregation understood Latin. So they couldn't understand it, they couldn't read it, there were no service books anyway. So to all intents and purposes, people out there were clueless as to what was going on. They had no idea what was happening. And when the point in the Mass, as it would have been called, the communion service came, where the priest said, "This is my body and this is my blood," do you know what happened? No. There was a little bell that was rang. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. And that told the people, it has changed. It's now different. That's what happened. It still happens in Catholic churches today. There's a bell that's rang. They needed to know when the change took place. And there was, if you like, a superstitious belief about whatever it was. They would keep it under their tongue. They'd go the rest of the service with it under their tongue. And when sheep, more productive. There was that level of superstition, as it were. Here's an amusing aside. I don't know whether you know this, but the word, or the two words, hocus pocus, all right, we think it came from show business, hocus pocus, it changes, magic. It didn't. Hocus pocus came from the Latin in the communion service. And the Latin for "this is my body," see if you can hear the hocus pocus, is hoceste enim corpus meum. Aquinas in the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, he was, "Sight, touch and taste in thee are each deceived. The ear alone most safely is believed." When it comes to the Holy Eucharist, all of our senses fail us save one. Our sense of sight, taste and touch are useless because they tell us it's bread and wine. The Holy Eucharist looks like bread, feels like bread and tastes like bread. But one sense alone, our sense of hearing, we can trust. We hear the words of Christ, who cannot deceive us and tells us, "This is my body, this is my blood." He was trying to explain why it looks, tastes and feels like bread and wine. Let's jump now to the Enlightenment period between 1600 and 1800, where everything is seen as natural or supernatural. There was, if you like, a distinction. And this guy, Glenn Packiam, who, this book's quite helpful in this, it's not all about communion, but he says a lot of great things about communion. He says this: "For much of the Western world, the Enlightenment drastically changed the way people saw the world. Instead of a creation in which the Creator was present and active, there was just nature. God was relegated upstairs to the supernatural realm, while humans inhabited the downstairs natural realm." Separation, whereas previously everything was intermingled. Therefore, the Enlightenment taught us that bread is bread. Nothing else. Bread is bread. And we now live in the post-Enlightenment period, after the Enlightenment happened, as it were. And we've often, the typical person in society doesn't see anything spiritual in anything, generally, because we live with money and food and stuff and physical stuff. We have no need for God anymore. But for us, I ask the question, could the bread become something else for us? Now we're going to do a bit of a practical demonstration here, so wake up a bit. Jack, Malcolm, Julia and Andy, could you do me a favour and just give these 4 plates of bread out, take them round and distribute them as soon as you can, please, as quickly as you can. I'll just take one first of all. Thank you. Sorry not to warn you about this. Please take a piece of bread. It might have been a bit dry now because we've cut it up and it's all drying out, but don't eat it yet. For those of you at home, we're just distributing a piece of bread. If you want to go and get a piece of bread, you can try this yourself, then please do. Has everyone got a piece of bread? Forgive me, I haven't got any gluten-free for those who can't eat gluten. We used to do this in science at school when I was a teacher. Thank you, you four. That's really helpful. And what I'm going to ask you to do is take the bread into your mouth and chew it around, but don't swallow it. It's a bit dry, I apologise. Keep it in your mouth. Keep chewing it. It's very tempting to swallow it. Does anybody notice anything about the taste? Sorry? Getting stronger. I've got to swallow it so I can speak. Do swallow it. Does anybody notice it got sweeter? Yeah? A few of you do. Unfortunately, the bread I've used has probably got quite a lot of sugar in it already. But typically, when you eat bread without sugar in, it's starch, which has no sweetness to it. But the enzymes in your saliva start breaking down the starch, and the end product of that breakdown is sugar. And that's why the bread is absorbed as sugar, etc. Could it be that bread could be something else as well? All right, we've just seen there's a possibility you might be able to taste the sugar in it. Let's jump now to the viewpoint of God's glory. We've looked at the history of where we've come, how we've progressed and what have you. And I'm going to belt through some passages here which describes God's glory or his presence. So in Genesis 28 verse 16, this is the dream that Jacob had he saw a ladder. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. We had a joke at our life group on Wednesday. The previous week, Anne had told me to go and get some extra chairs, and when we actually came to sit down, we didn't need the extra chairs that I got. So when Anne shouted to me, Phil, go and get some extra chairs on Wednesday, I went dutifully, brought them down, and again we had an extra chair. And I joked that actually, well, we can keep this one for Jesus. Jesus wasn't physically with us in the room, but maybe his presence was. Jacob there, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them, yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Isaiah chapter 6 verse 3, and this is what the heavenly beings are crying out. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Habakkuk 2 verse 14. For the earth will be filled with, maybe there's a song you can remember here, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. And in Jeremiah 23 verse 24, when I found this verse, I thought that's lovely. Can a man hide himself in hiding places so I do not see him, declares the Lord? Do I not fill the heavens and the earth? Declares the Lord. God's presence is all around us, and particularly in communion, where Jesus said, this is my body, this is my blood. The great theologian Augustine talked about a sacrament. The Church of England believes in two sacraments, a sacrament of baptism and a sacrament of communion. And he said that a sacrament is an outward, visible sign of an inward grace. Something that is hidden becomes visible. Is it true that God's presence is in not just the bread and the wine, but when we celebrate communion together? God is here. And Glenn Packiam said, God has hidden his glory in the ordinary. And he goes on to say this in his book. Your protector, deliverer, and redeemer is watching over you. He is there when you wake, with you as you walk and work. He weeps with you when your heart is breaking. He sings over you when you've lost your words. He sits with you in the stillness. Surely the Lord is in your kitchen and in your car and in your office and the moments of each day, though you do not know it yet. We're going to be singing in a moment, after communion, we're going to sing the song Guardian, which talks about God going before you, him being beside you, behind you. The Orthodox theologian Alexander Schumann, he said this: God blesses everything he creates, and in biblical language this means that he makes all creation the sign and the means of his presence and wisdom, love and revelation. And Glenn Packiam goes on to comment on what he said. He said, at Passover, Jesus took bread and blessed it in an extraordinary way. He called it his body. For all the things that phrase could mean, at the very least, it means that coming to the Lord's table and receiving communion is a moment to experience the presence of God. Jesus, probably reclining on the floor at that first communion at the Passover, the Last Supper as we often call it, he said, this is my body. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me. Can I make a suggestion? This is there's nothing that says one way of doing this is right and the other way is wrong. When I stand giving the bread out, when people come up, there's two ways that people typically have the bread. They either come up with their hands like this, and I put a piece of bread in their hands, or I take a piece of bread and they take it from my fingers. Can I make a suggestion that we try to do one thing today, and that is to hold out our hands so that we receive the body and blood, the bread, rather than choosing to take it, that we actually receive it. It's a different stance. I'm not saying one is different to the other or better. Philosophy, religion and reason have changed over the centuries. Came the separation of natural and supernatural. But now we are educated, we are sophisticated, perhaps we are arrogant. We have no need of God. We can do it all ourselves. Nature is supreme, no need for the supernatural. And I'm sure, like me, you would contest a lot of that. The Bible tells us repeatedly that God's glory is present in nature. There are two photos of some flowers that Anne picked. Anne's trying to pick flowers each day or each week to have on the kitchen table. Some crocus, are they crocuses? No, they're cyclamen and Anne's favourite snowdrops. They are stunningly beautiful. The Bible tells us repeatedly that God's glory and presence are everywhere. We just need to look at the night sky or a beautiful flower to recognize the fingerprint or the thumbprint of God in our lives. But there is something mysterious about communion when Jesus says, "This is my body, this is my blood." I believe that God is with us his presence is with us at communion. And we actually experience his presence when we share bread and wine together. And the challenge, I think, is to notice it. Various people have asked me to encourage people when we go back to our seats to do it in silence. Now, sometimes it's great to celebrate and to sing and to praise and to laugh when we go back to our seats with bread and wine, but sometimes it's good simply to reflect. And that's what I'm going to encourage us to do today. We're going to move into communion now. When you go back to your seats, please don't say a word. I'd almost be tempted to say, if you don't mind, I've just remembered I've got a hole in my sock this morning. If you don't mind, take you remember when Moses approached the burning bush, God said, take your shoes off. This is holy ground. So shall we, in the right spirit, and if you're like Sonia, hanging on by the skin of your, whatever it is, the skin of your teeth, is it? By your fingertips, make sure you come to communion. And what qualifications do you need to come for communion? For me, it's as simple as, if you're trying to follow Jesus, if you want to live your life like him, then you're very welcome to come and take bread and wine. If you'd prefer to remain where you are seated, that's absolutely fine. Or alternatively, if you'd like to come and simply ask for a blessing, then just come, keep your hands down by your sides, and I'm very happy to pray for you. The way we're going to do it this morning is we'll come down the 2 aisles here, and then you'll take bread and wine from here. Go back to your place by going back up the central aisle, please. And parents and grandparents, if you can look after your children. I know they're not in here at the moment, but sorry, we're unprepared here. I did wash my hands earlier, by the way. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, do you want to come up, James? Ready? On the night that Jesus was betrayed, with his friends, he took bread and he gave thanks for it. Do you remember how the children last week told us what the different things we should do? He took bread and gave thanks for it, and he broke it. And let me add a slightly different take on this as well. When Jesus said, "This is my body," could he have also been looking at you or his disciples and saying, "This is my body"? Because we, the church, are described as the body of Christ. This is my body. This is my body, broken for you. Take it, each of you, and eat. And after the meal, Jesus took the cup of wine. Again, he gave thanks for it. He gave it to his disciples and said, "This is my blood, shed for many." And he said, "Whenever you eat this bread or drink this cup, remember me. This is my body. This is my blood." God is here by faith. We're going to bring the table forward a little bit, I think. Do you want to lift the cloth? And then the choreography is amazing, isn't it? I guess we'll say goodbye to the stream now. If you're still with us, thank you for joining us. I hope you'll listen to this again. Do take bread and wine and reflect on what Jesus meant by it. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.